I think of you often and hope we see each other as soon as is possible. Until such time.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this evening. My name's Erin Kautz. I am a staff attorney at Legal Action of Wisconsin, but I'm not here representing Legal Action today. I am representing myself privately as someone who's involved with the Homeless Justice Initiative. But my work with Legal Action is what got me interested in the housing justice issues in our community. So today we are meeting with County Supervisor Yogesh Chawla, and I believe that City Alder Davy Mayer will also be joining us. But we have some great speakers from the West Coast who've been doing some great work around getting publicly funded housing off the ground. And that is something that we, as part of the Homeless Justice Initiative, are really trying to push for in Madison, just with the housing affordability crisis, and especially with housing affordability in Dane County right now. We think that the solution to that is to really push for publicly owned housing. So I want to first introduce Maria Sippen, and if you could give a short introduction of yourself and the work that you're doing in Oregon, um, that's how we'll get this started.
Sounds good. Thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm so lucky to have met some of you in Chicago at a recent conference when I spoke about social housing then, and I'm happy to be invited to speak to you all here. I'm speaking here from Portland, Oregon. I work for an elected official's office, Councilor Mitch Green. I am his chief of staff. I also bring my policy development experience, my policy implementation experience, and of course, the experience I'm most proud of is being a community organizer on transportation safety issues, renters' rights, and all kinds of public health and civil rights issues my entire career, especially as a young person back in the day. And now that I've aged out of that, I'm really proud to be able to do this out of an elected office where I think I've been waiting for this opportunity to escalate and prioritize some of the things I've tried to fight for with my community members. And now I feel like there's this window of possibility that's available to me and my community now because we have some elected officials and the political will to help propel that forward. My background is in urban planning and public health. I worked a lot in healthcare and community health, serving unhoused people, especially foster youth and unhoused LGBTQ youth. And fast forward, I think a lot of the work that I've done more recently in Portland has been around COVID recovery and implementing the American Rescue Plan Act dollars and ARPA with participatory budgeting to deliver some material goods and resources to people, especially young people under the age of 25 who have been harmed and impacted by COVID in our lower income communities and communities of color. I can say a little more as I talk about my presentation and as we engage in dialogue, but I'll leave it at that.
Um, and I just want to check and see. I don't know that Ben has been able to join us yet. So if you wanted to go into more of your presentation.
Sure. Would you help me keep time? I think I have about maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Okay,
yes.
that sounds good. And should I just keep talking or should I pause for questions or would you like the questions addressed at the very end of the panel?
I think it's what you're comfortable with.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm happy to take questions from the chat. Erin, if you could keep an eye on the chat for me, and if you think there's like a question that should be addressed sooner, feel free to interrupt me. I welcome that.
All right, sounds
So
good.
Yes, I'm here to talk about social housing. I know there's different terminologies for it, and I'll just use that because that's what my talk in Chicago has covered, and that's also the title of the resolution that my city council in Portland had recently passed. So I'll talk a little bit about this political moment, the power of local and regional governments to address housing right now. We also are experiencing in real time the threats to states and local government, especially sanctuary cities like Portland, Oregon, and Oregon itself. We have this housing and humanitarian crises in front of us, bigger than ever, and it's worse now in Portland, and we know it's about to get much, much worse, given some of the threats to affordable housing funding and just basic safety net programs and services that we've always relied on. We also have these tools available to us right now to step up in this moment. I know it feels like things are dire. It's hard to look past some of the harm and hurt that we see every day, but I do believe we have these tools that we can implement, maybe not so quickly, but they are available to us, whether they're financial tools or these policy tools, so that we can make real housing solutions that are affordable, and not just affordable, but deeply affordable, and provide long-term affordability for people of all income levels, especially those who are lowest income or have fixed income, especially later in their lives. We want to center low-income people with this housing solution, social housing in particular. We know this is a solution for the working class, people who are fixed income, like I said, like seniors who rely on Social Security payments and try to stretch those dollars as much as they can. But they tell us too that those dollars don't go very far, especially if you spend most of that on housing. And I'm really proud to talk about my counselor, Counselor Mitch Green, who's an economist, a proud socialist, open socialist in office. He co-sponsored a resolution that he led to ask City Council to support this social housing study. We got the votes to pass it, and that's just one of the steps to making social housing real in Portland. I can talk a little bit about why we chose this route of going for a study before passing any other types of housing action, and what that means for us. Now this clock is ticking for the Housing Bureau here to complete it within a year. And we also chose council action as a way to propel social housing versus voter initiative or referendum, because right now we're in this political moment where we have about 6 progressive votes that we can rely on council to help move some of these key policies forward. We have 4 socialists in office who have been highlighted quite frequently for how they vote with alignment. And I think that's a moment that we're trying to take advantage of now too, because we know that they want to focus on these material wins for the working class, especially when it comes to housing. So I'm going to catch my breath for a second and see if there are any questions or reactions in the chat. None yet, so thank you for that. My counselor took office in January of this year. We are part of this brand new form of government. Some of you might have been following what's happening in Portland, Oregon right now. We are implementing a brand new government that's challenged what's been in place for the last 100 years or more. And thanks to voter reforms of our charter, we now have a 12-person council, which has expanded our council significantly. We have district representation for the first time. We have 4 districts with 3 counselors per district, and we elected our counselors through ranked choice voting, single transferable vote, which allowed voters to select up to 6 choices in this ranked choice ballot for the first time. And it's enabled actually good proportional representation of the views and values and needs on council. I mention this because I don't think we would have been able to achieve some of the policy wins we've had recently without this type of charter reform. We have counselors who campaigned on housing solutions specifically. They were intent on passing things like the Voters' Bill of Rights. They were intent on passing social housing specifically. But what we didn't know then when counselors were or candidates were campaigning on this, what passing social housing at the city would look like. So the way we tackled this in my office was come January when we took office, we were thinking about ways to move social housing forward. We met with our Housing Bureau Director, Helmi Heserick, who had come from Los Angeles previously, had a lot of experience with tax increment finance districts, and wanted to come to Portland to advance, a different type of housing agenda. She wanted to build permanently affordable housing, and she said she was a self-proclaimed social housing expert. She studied social housing models like Vienna, and we had a good time meeting her once we took office, saw this alignment, and she encouraged us to pass a resolution with specific components that would direct her and her office to study social housing models and also the financing mechanisms that would help bring social housing to Portland successfully, and then also to study the impediments that exist now that would keep social housing from being successfully implemented. So with her guidance on how to craft that resolution, we worked with our legal team, our attorneys in-house. We talked to community organizers about what elements of social housing were important to them. And we've talked to lots of coalitions who want to support social housing, as well as people who are experienced in implementing affordable housing currently. And we took a lot of their feedback into account. Our council passed this with a majority vote, and that started this clock that's now winding down that directs the Housing Bureau to do this study by spring of next year. So we're really looking forward to those results. And for any communities or cities who are trying to figure out where do we start when it comes to some kind of local council action or county action on social housing, that's one template you could potentially follow. And I think in Portland that worked really well because we've seen historically that policies that might come to council that other maybe more moderate counselors are not comfortable with, they're going to demand to have more details, potentially a study. They want to see a whole suite of options before they vote for any single one of them. And I think Helmi's direction on that was really helpful. She could already predict that council would struggle potentially with supporting something like this. So the study was something that a lot of counselors thought would be really valuable. What I need to also mention here is that this study isn't low cost or free. Studies do cost money. Many of you have done maybe potentially studies internally with your own teams and resources, have contracted out experts, or have worked with local universities and other academic institutions to help furnish some of these studies. For us, what it's looking like is some community partners at the university, as well as other experts who Helmi Heserick, the director, will contract out, and we have yet to see who some of those experts will be. But we trust that she's going to select a good bench of people to help us develop this report. She is funded by a HUD grant that she was awarded, I believe, like pre-Trump executive orders. I know there's some funding concerns related to this right now, but she feels really confident that she'll have the resources to carry out this study. And I'll pause there and just give people the opportunity to reflect on some of the things I've said, and I can share some resources. Yes, Sheldon, thank you. You asked for a link to the resolution and to spell out more what I mean by social housing. While I'm getting the link up right now, I love that you asked go for it.
Yeah, because my hand has been up for a little
Sure.
while now.
Sure.
And also, I don't know why I can't put anything in the chat. But my question was going to be if you could share more about, the model of social housing and what that consists of. Even though I hear you, I'm listening to it and processing it, but I definitely want to learn more because it seems like it's a new term or some, new terminology that I am brand new to tonight. The other part to that is I wanted you to kind of, if you could talk a little more about working class. When you say working class is people that's fixed income, because to me, fixed income is also those that's low income. So I'm kind of having a little, so I just want you just a little, if you can just elaborate a little bit more on that. I'm just trying to get an understanding if that makes sense.
Of course, that sounds good. And did I say this? Am I saying this right? Is that Takesha?
Yep, you saying it right. You have it right.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be able to address you appropriately here. Thank you for that question. I'll start with talking about working class. I know we use that often, this term, and we talk about people who are not part of the wealth class or people who are not part of the ruling class. It's quite broad. Working class also means people who don't work. These are people who depend on resources and programs from the government as well. People who work full-time jobs, for example, but still can't have their basic needs met. We know the housing burden is huge for folks. What this means is, like, in the Portland metro area, like half the population spends half their income on housing. And with social housing, what we're trying to do with the study is find exactly what those models of housing are, what types of publicly run or shared ownership models look like, where the city and potentially nonprofits share and implement housing together, or it could be completely city run. I think that's what the study intends to do too, is to share all types of different models, whether it's completely government owned and run, or do we have these like co-op models where government shares it with nonprofit owners, or shares it even with tenants, where tenants have some kind of shared ownership here for, let's say, 99 years. So that's where we kept it really loose. And I apologize that there's not a lot of like defined examples or models, but that's where Portland is at too. We had those same exact questions. We know we're really interested in social housing that's government run, that is not on the market or not subject to market pricing. And we're going to depend on this study to help us generate all the different models. We also know that calling it social housing is a barrier in so many other places where there are political leaders who automatically reject the idea of social housing because it's called that, or because it is off the market entirely. We know too that social housing might have an uphill battle in some places because folks don't like the fact that there's no profit to be made from it potentially. And a lot of cities partner with developers and people who own properties because of the real estate potential and the property generating values. So I think that's something we're wrestling with. And you're right, fixed income folks could also include people who are wealthy, but in this particular context, we're talking about seniors, maybe people who are age 60 and up, who have limited income, who have increasingly been burdened by housing costs, where their one bedroom apartment maybe used to cost $700 or $800 a month. It is now increasingly in the $1,200 a month range or more. And they've been fighting rent increases every year. And that's something that they haven't been able to push back on, or even types of like rent caps or any types of ceilings like that have just been being raised even with 10%, rent control. It's just not enough for them to stay stable. So that's what we mean by people who are fixed income and who really are struggling with housing right now. And in this context, we're not talking about people who are wealthy with fixed income, just folks who really like have maybe 20 or 40-hour jobs. They know their income isn't growing, even though the cost of living is growing. That's some of the people we're including in this umbrella too. And I'm just pulling up the social housing resolution text. Please give me a second. I know I'm running out of some time here. But if you have any other questions, go for it. Thank you for the press release that you posted in there. That's super helpful. I have a policy action area website for my counselor's office, and I'm going to plug that there too if you want to see the social housing resolution text. That's perfect. I think the press release spells it out really well too. So other cities have asked us, Portland, can we just copy your resolution? I mean, there's ways you can, but we have some whereas clauses that are quite unique to Portland. For example, whereas clauses that describe this new form of government that we have, whereas clauses that talk about some of the unique issues with Portland and affordability, especially related to people right now, related to their demographics. Like, you know, there's housing burden, especially with our Black community. So that's something that we wanted to highlight specifically. And it looks like one of my links is not working properly, but I'll pull that up for you, and I'll make sure I put it in the chat. Do I have any other hands raised, Erin, or anything else? If not, you know, I'm happy to move forward. I think one of the things I just wanted to emphasize here is we're in this political moment where we are receiving threats from the federal government to cut off our affordable housing dollars. We know the low-income housing tax credits are just running low and they've been oversubscribed for years. We are also looking at the ways that revolving loan funds can help fund some of our housing endeavors, and that's a really tangible way to make sure we can fund housing long term. And it's still something we need to study, but I am happy to report that in the Oregon legislature at the state level, one of our senators passed a bill to support revolving loans and revolving loan funds to fund affordable housing. So that also took the study route, but I think that's going to materialize maybe more quickly and it can help us at the local level. So there's a partnership with like the state and the local level to make sure we can create housing that is not market-based, that we also know market-based solutions aren't serving people well, which is why we have the housing crisis we have now. We also know homelessness is caused by losing housing, and people lose housing because of evictions, and evictions are caused by people's inability to pay mostly. And how we get to the core of that issue is creating housing solutions that people can actually afford. We know people are concerned about social housing or publicly owned housing that isn't the slums. People get this idea that you're going to create slum-like housing, and we push back at that. And we know there's ways we can take over current affordable housing developments and make them actually social housing and publicly owned housing so that we can price these that's appropriate to people's income levels and ability to pay. So I think that's, you know, our big message here. The market-based solutions aren't serving us well. We also know that we can address homelessness by stopping evictions, and by stopping evictions, we mean creating even all kinds of tools and accountability methods so that people who manage housing aren't putting people out in the streets. We saw some things work during the COVID pandemic, but a lot of those protections have already been lifted. So we're grappling with the impact still of COVID and what it looks like to freeze rents or to continue creating some kind of safety net for people who are most at risk of being on the streets.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, but I will now introduce Ben Furlow, who works with House Our Neighbors in Seattle. And if you want to give a short introduction and talk a little bit about the referendums that were recently passed.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you all hear me very well? I want to make sure. Okay, sweet. Thank you. I'm at the gate. I'm taking a flight actually to Seattle. I was visiting family here in Kansas, so really excited to talk about my home, Seattle, and some really interesting stuff that we've been doing with social housing. So yeah, I work for House Our Neighbors. That's the nonprofit organization that created the Seattle social housing developer through a ballot initiative or a ballot referendum. And then just in this past February, funded that social housing developer by passing a second ballot initiative at the February 2025 ballot. I actually have a few slides to show to kind of tell you all about social housing and kind of what our approach was like and some of the lessons that we learned with making social housing happen in Seattle. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay. Let's show this. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. So first things first, I think it's important before we talk about like what social housing is, I just want to very quickly run through what our current approach is, our current policy approach to the affordability crisis and broadly the homelessness crisis that we have, not just in Seattle, but in the United States. And I'm sorry if Maria already talked a little bit about this, so hopefully it's not too duplicative. But there's three broadly speaking, three main mechanisms that we use to address housing affordability here in the United States. The first is the one that most people are familiar with, which is the public option. This is the traditional form of public housing. This is usually set aside only for people who are making less than 30% of the area median income, and it's very heavily regulated by the federal government. So one of those regulations that has led to a lot of the problems that Maria was just talking about, like with this reputation of public housing being sort of like slum housing, is this thing called the Faircloth Amendment. And what it says is that federal dollars cannot be spent on increasing housing stock, like the number of public housing units, from above the 1999 baseline. So if the Seattle Housing Authority has 7,000 units of public housing in 1999, HUD dollars cannot be spent on increasing the number of units. It can only be spent on maintaining them. So we're pretty much locked in from there. This and the fact that the tenants have very, very low income, less than 30% area median income, means that not a lot of money is going towards these buildings, and so they have declining quality over time. And on top of that, because it's public housing, of course, and the way our government has treated public housing, it has been very severely underfunded over the years. So quality has declined very rapidly over the decades. The other one that we use to provide affordable housing is through the nonprofit sector. This is actually the thing that provides the vast majority of our public housing, or sorry, our affordable housing stock in the United States. And the way that this is done is primarily through this federal program called LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And basically how that works is private capital, private investors who want to invest in affordable housing, low income affordable housing developers who typically serve tenants who make less than 60% of the area median income. Those private investments are not taxed. You get a tax credit for investing in that. And so that's a way to sort of tease private investment into building affordable housing without the government having to like actively do something about it. It's a tax credit, right? The problem, of course, with this is that just like with the traditional public housing, because the tenants do not make a lot of money, so rents are very low, to make it affordable for them, of course. This requires a very massive subsidy to make the buildings pencil out. And another problem with them is that they do not come with permanent affordability requirements. Most of the time, at best, these come with maybe 99-year affordability requirements. But a lot of times what happens in the real world is that because of market conditions, a lot of low-income affordable housing developers will find themselves in a situation where they have to sell off some of these buildings to a for-profit management company instead. And so it goes to the private market. And so then people who are living in these buildings suddenly see their rents jump up, or maybe the tax credits expire. And so then the rents jump up now that they're no longer protected by the affordability covenant. This also brings us into the other way that affordable housing is procured in the United States, in the United States, which is through the private sector. And this is done usually through one of two ways: incentive programs and penalty policies. So in Seattle, we have one incentive program. It's called the Multifamily Tax Exemption, or MFTE. And how that works is that for-profit developers, if they set aside a portion of their units for low-income tenants, they don't have to pay taxes on the building, which is nice because property taxes on the building both decrease the supply of buildings, of course, and increase the price. And that price increase, of course, is passed on to the tenants. So it's effectively just like a tax on renters. And they only have to pay tax on the land, which is not flexible in supply. And so only the owner has to pay for that. The other side of this is the penalty policy. We have this thing called MHA, which is mandatory housing affordability. So in certain areas of Seattle, they are upzoned. But if you want to build in that upzoned area, you have to build a majority of your housing units as affordable. If you don't, and you want to build in that, you can instead pay a fee. And that fee goes into a fund that then gets spent on nonprofit, low-income housing, low-income affordable housing instead. And most developers just tend to pay the fee, is what tends to happen. The issue with this, of course, the private market, and this is also true for the nonprofit, but especially for the private market solution, is that it's incredibly subject to market conditions. As an example, private per capita housing starts have not recovered from the 2008 recession highs, right? So relying on the private market, and we all know this, but relying on the private market, broadly speaking, is not a sustainable solution. This is where social housing comes in, to make up for a lot of the deficits that we see with our current affordable housing approach. These deficits are broadly these few things. First, as I've talked about, the low income restrictions of affordable housing means that, oh, let me go back, not enough income is generated from the buildings, right? Because in order to be affordable for low income tenants, the rents have to be very low. And so then this makes the building very reliant on public dollars, especially federal dollars, which, as Maria mentioned earlier, is declining. And under the current federal administration, I don't know if this was mentioned, but the current plan, I think as it was passed in the most recent reconciliation bill, is to gut HUD spending on LIHTC by about 50%. So low-income affordable housing providers are going to be struggling, and their tenants especially are going to be struggling a lot from this. So this is very much like dependent upon political headwinds, which is not sustainable. The other thing, of course, for public housing, as I mentioned, is the Faircloth Amendment, right, which puts a national cap on HUD dollars being spent on increasing the actual supply of public housing through our municipal and county public housing authorities. So we're capped there, which has effectively halted new construction of public housing. And with all of these current approaches, public dollars, whenever they are spent, they're spent going towards the private market. And I say private here to mean both the for-profit and for the nonprofit. Basically, just think public dollars are going into something other than a public good with no long-term guarantee of affordability, right? And then, of course, we get sort of a socioeconomic side effect of this, which is that due to the income restricted nature of these affordable housing developments, what it does is it in many ways traps tenants into a cycle of poverty and neglect. And also leads further economic segregation and puts a lot of people into situations where their benefits, their access to this low income affordable housing is based on that, their low income. And if they start to make more money, they could potentially lose access to that affordable housing. And so their alternatives to go into the private market where they have to pay even more towards rent. So what good was that increase in income? And if you're renting in somewhere like Seattle, where not a lot of housing has been built over the last 60 years due to zoning, NIMBYism, that kind of thing, you're going not only onto an unaffordable market, but a market where there's just not a lot of like options close to work, close to childcare, close to transportation, close to grocery stores, close to parks, all of that stuff. And so our current approach is very haphazard, not sustainable, very dependent upon political headwinds, financially unsustainable, and isn't serving the people that it's supposed to be serving to the fullest extent that it ought to. This is where social housing comes in. So social housing is different from our current approach in a few key ways. First thing first, public ownership. And when I'm talking about social housing here, I just want to be very clear. Social housing, what we consider to be social housing, is based on the international model of social housing, the kind of social housing that's existed for about a century now around the world, and has been very successful by building and abiding by to these key characteristics. So public ownership. This means that the government owns it, usually through a public corporation or some public authority, and the housing, the land, all of that stuff owned by the government. And so what this means is that money invested in social housing literally stays in-house rather than going to the private market, to the nonprofit or the for-profit market. All of that money goes and stays into a public good, a public portfolio that's being built up. The other aspect, and as a consequence of this public ownership, actually, you're able to pull off a permanence. Permanence in the public ownership, ideally, that's how Seattle does it. So in Seattle, our social housing cannot ever be sold off to the private market forever. It must always be owned by the public in perpetuity, is written into law that way. But more broadly speaking, the way the permanence is manifested in social housing is through the permanent affordability. And in Seattle specifically, what that looks like is no tenant has to pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. So that's what we mean by permanently affordable. The other really cool aspect of social housing is the lack of income caps. So whereas with public housing and low income affordable housing, where you're renting to less than 30% or less than 60% area median income respectively, social housing is available to ideally everybody, but at minimum, a very broad range of incomes. In Seattle, our social housing developer by law has to focus on 0 to 120% of the area median income, but it's empowered to rent out to all incomes, which is awesome because then you're able to do cross income subsidy. So higher income tenants are able to, by paying into their rent, able to subsidize the cost or the differential between how much it costs to rent out to a low income tenant versus how much you're actually charging in rent for low income tenants. And so you don't have to have ongoing rental subsidies to make buildings pencil out. You can instead just have public dollars being spent towards upfront capital and use that cross income subsidy to make the operating costs pencil out. This is how literally every private development works, right? Aside from the money required for the upfront capital to build the building in the first place, but the actual act of mixing costs and sharing that burden across all tenants within a building, that's how it works. It's also how airplanes work, how they charge fares. It's a very common model in the private market. And so in the context of our affordable housing response, with this, you can think of this as essentially replacing LIHTC dollars with middle to high income renters. And so what this allows you to do is not only, well, building more units of housing just in general, but you're actually able to build just as many, if not more units for those low income tenants as you otherwise would have been building if you were dependent upon LIHTC dollars. So you get both best of both worlds, serving the same number of low income people, and you're also providing affordable housing for middle to high income earners, which is a group of people that in Seattle and many urban areas, Portland, New York City, et cetera, that are actually also struggling to afford rent. And not just struggling to afford it, but also just like finding a place to live in the first place, right? So the result here is that public dollars are being spent on a public good with the financial flexibility by being able to rent out to a broad range of incomes to expand its portfolio and serve the broader public, serving the whole public. And again, this is a internationally proven model that has existed around the world. There's tens of millions of people who are living in social housing of this kind right now as we speak. After, and I'll talk about this in a bit, Prop 1A, but after we passed Proposition 1A, I took a few weeks vacation to go to a place where 80% of the population lives in social housing, which is Singapore. And it's very beautiful. And it's because of this model that Singapore especially uses, where they sell their social housing. This is all public housing that you're seeing right here. Because they sell it to a wide range of incomes, the developer, their social housing developer, is far more financially sustainable, is able to rent out to far more people, collect way more money, and as a result, they have a 90% home ownership rate. And in a city with a population of 6 million people, there are less than 500 people who are homeless. In Seattle, we have a population of 800,000, and we have almost 13,000 people who are homeless. Just to put some numbers in perspective here. This is what happens when you have a public authority that is given the dollars and the flexibility and the ability to serve the broader public rather than being narrowly restricted into means testing. And also in Singapore's case, the government throws $5 billion a year at it. That helps a lot too. So this kind of segues into the next thing, which is like, how do we make this pencil out, right? How do you actually like pay for this? So the way that we pay for it in Seattle was through the creation of a excess compensation payroll tax or a social housing payroll tax. Basically how it works is any business that operates in the city of Seattle or has an employee in the city of Seattle, and if they compensate that employee more than $1 million a year in compensation, so not just like wages and salary, stock options, stock bonuses, all that the city of Seattle considers to be compensation. The Prop 1A tax captures 5% of the compensation above the first million. So we leave the first million alone, and we tax 5% above that. This is based on IRS tax data, and this was confirmed by the city of Seattle when we were running the campaign. This is expected to bring roughly about $50 million a year. And some years it'll be more and some years it'll be less, of course, because this is somewhat dependent upon the stock market, since stock options, stock grants are considered part of compensation. And in Seattle, we are a tech hub. So obviously a lot of compensation is in the form of stock. This will vary roughly, but you can say about $50 million a year, give or take. And the way that we passed this was through a progressive coalition of a lot of people who came together who recognized the need for social housing, or at least the need for something better than our current housing approach. And so this, of course, was a lot of unions. It was a lot of affordable housing developers. It was a lot of urbanists, tenants, democratic socialists, environmental activists, just lots and lots of people's, and especially the renters of affordable housing developments who were like, we want this. This would be amazing to have, to live in housing that's not economically segregated, that's not chronically underfunded, and has a more financially sustainable model, so we can build nice things like what they have around the world. Because we alluded to Vienna, we talked about Singapore a lot when we were doing this campaign as a better model. And because the social housing is able to provide higher quality housing than our traditional approach, and not only provide higher quality housing, but it's able to provide it to everybody rather than just low-income people, as our current approach does. It was broadly popular. So the first initiative, which created the social housing developer, February 2023, that passed with 57% of the vote at the February 2023 ballot. The tax to fund it this past February passed with 63.5% of the vote. So 26% margin. And again, I just said it, but I really do want to hammer home that like it is the fact that our social housing initiative and our social housing developer is so bold and is so encompassing and serves everybody, that you're able to get a broader share of the public that could benefit from this, that is on board with this, rather than people who may just be voting for supporting something out of ideologically sound or moral reasons because it's like the right thing to do. This is something that everybody benefits from, and it is because everybody benefits from it that makes it work. And so now that Prop 1A has passed, the Seattle social housing developer is going to begin building and acquiring permanently affordable social housing. They're expected to get site control of a couple of properties by the end of the year, and then start rapidly acquiring more housing so they can get a portfolio put together to create a revenue stream paired with the payroll tax revenue stream. So that way the social housing developer can also start bonding. That's another cool thing about our social housing developers, that has bonding authority, which of course most developers do not have that. And our social housing developer is expected to build around 400 units annually in a city with a population of about 800,000 people. Again, this is just the beginning of the social housing movement in Seattle, and just with this one tax, House Our Neighbors intends to come back in a few years and pursue additional revenue streams to diversify the revenue portfolio of the social housing developer. But for now, we're very excited, of course, about our success in making this happen. So that's all I have to talk about our social housing developer. I'd like to open up to questions for anybody who might have anything about how social housing in Seattle works, or just broadly about like how we pulled this off, and what that coalition looked like and all that good jazz. But thank you for having me. I'm gonna check the chat, actually, see if anybody. No, okay.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for the
Hi.
talk. I found that extremely informative. Yeah, I would like you to expand on how you pulled that off and what that coalition looked like. Because, we're a coalition trying to accomplish similar things. So yeah, I guess hearing how it was pulled off in Seattle might help us. So yeah, if you could expand on that, please do.
Totally. So House Our Neighbors, the way it started was back in 2022. And it started actually in opposition to a charter amendment to the City of Seattle Charter. There were some business groups that were going to try to enshrine the ability for the City of Seattle to do homeless encampment sweeps. And it was not going to come with any services, any funding for services, or any funding for increased shelter beds, anything like that. It was literally just going to be like full legal authority to just sweep whenever they want, no appeals process, all that. And so House Our Neighbors formed an opposition to that to kill the charter amendment, and they got it thrown off the ballot. I don't remember the technicals, but basically it was over a legal issue with the charter amendment itself. As we got rid of that, and of course, you know, it's one thing to get rid of a bad thing, but you can't just like get rid of a bad thing and leave a vacuum. You need to replace it with like an actual solution. And so Housing Neighbors came together with a bunch of tenants, union activists, housing activists, and whatnot. And again, especially a lot of tenants from low-income affordable housing providers to figure out what else could we do instead. And rather than looking at home, we decided to turn abroad and see how other countries and other cities had solved their housing and homelessness crisis. And so that's how we came upon social housing as like an actual, maybe not like a short-term solution, but something that if you build out does provide a long-term solution that gets at the root of the problem here, right? Because like what our city kind of prefers to do, what many cities prefer to do, is sort of like regulatory tweaks, right? As I talked about, to try to sort of tease out the private market into doing the right thing. And this, of course, comes with problems because, like, I mean, yes, increasing housing supply objectively will lower rents, but it will never be able to lower rents enough to serve everybody. And that's kind of the key issue here, right? Is that it is a supply problem, but it's also a government intervention problem at the same time. And so that's what was so appealing about social housing, is it seemed like it was the best of both. It was the government intervening to also create more housing. And so because our city council and especially our mayor, who's still the current mayor, as he was at the time, was unilaterally opposed to the idea of social housing for a broad array of reasons. Some opposed it because they felt like it would compete with affordable housing developers and their money. We fully, you know, from the beginning said we would never go after the same revenue source, and we've always maintained that and never did. Some were against it because they felt, for some asinine reason, that just because it works around the world, for some reason it won't work here, which I think is dumb. And I guess the laws of economics are totally different once you cross an arbitrary line on a map, is what I've been told. So some opposed it for that reason. And others were just like more broadly skeptical, didn't want to like take on the effort. So rather than lobbying our city council or our mayor or whatever, we decided to go straight to the voters. And we were able to do that because in Washington, we have the privilege of the ballot initiative process. And so what we did is we put together I-135, which was the initiative that created the social housing developer, which is the thing that legally enshrines the requirements for permanent affordability, being broadly available to all incomes, having a tenant governorship in the social housing board, all that stuff. So we didn't have to make compromises. We could be bold. We could be progressive about it. We could just appeal to the people. And so we did. And so then what that looked like was finding anybody and everybody who was down to help out with us to gather signatures. Because in Seattle, you have to gather, it's about 27,500 signatures to put it on the ballot, and you have to gather them in person within 6 months. And so we depended very heavily on a lot of activist organizations, especially the Seattle chapter of the Democratic Socialists, who were very on board with this and have a lot of field capacity to field out volunteers to talk to voters, get their signature. And then we did that very narrowly, got it on the ballot, and then did the same thing to get out the vote. Door knocking from September 2022 until February 2023. And then we came back again in 2024 to gather signatures and do it once more. That's when I was the field director from February 2024 to this past February. And so I did all the organizing for the volunteers, working with any and all organizations that might be down to support social housing to make this a reality. We gathered 38,000 signatures from voters, put it on the ballot, and then door knocked like hell. Door knocked, got like 45,000 doors in the span of about 2.5 months through the rain and the winter. It was treacherous, but we did it because, and we were able to do it because we, again, by going to the voters, we get to decide what's in this ballot initiative. And so we don't have to make compromises. We can be bold. We can be inspiring. We can give people a reason to come out in the cold and the rain to knock doors. So I think more broadly, if you have the ability, and I think I saw in the chat that Wisconsin has a ballot initiative process. So if if this is an option for you, I would strongly recommend it by just going straight to the voters. You can even, maybe not, I wouldn't use the word threaten, but you can suggest that when you're talking to city council, when you're talking to your elected officials, as like, if you don't want to do this, we could just go to the voters and make it happen ourselves. And here in Seattle, that's resonated very well, because now that it's passed, suddenly all the city council members who publicly campaigned against us, what do you know? Now everybody suddenly is like super supportive of social housing and are now campaigning on it so they could win re-election this year. So it's an effective tool going straight to the voters. And I think broadly, this political moment that we're in, I mean, I'm just going to, throw out Zoran Mabdani as an example of this, where, like, as it turns out, if you go to left-wing voters with left-wing policies and left-wing talking points, they'll vote for it. Who would have thought? I know. So anyway, that's, long story short, kind of how we did it. Hopefully that, I try to keep it as short as possible, because I know there's other questions and I don't want to burn through time, but hopefully that kind of answers.
It definitely does. Thank you.
Then, hey, this is Yogesh.
Good.
Put some links in the chat. So I've been researching referendums in Wisconsin. So we do a lot of referendums here. So we did for I
Oh,
think
sweet.
the city did one recently. Unfortunately, for most of the school funding, just because the state is not really funding the schools, we have to do those as well. So the process is the governing body stops at first. So whether that's the school board or the county board or the city council, and then I put some links in on the statutory language as well. I think, and we were trying to confirm this for any referendum, since it's going to be an even numbered year next year, it's going to be part of the federal election in the fall. I believe that's when you can do it. It's not, can't do it in the spring, but this is something we're looking into. So I can share a bunch of slides about this after the meeting. I could just send them out and get it out there. But they've made referendums. Unfortunately, the way we do a lot of the funding here in Wisconsin, particularly for municipalities, I did ask our lobbyist. I just met with our Dane County lobbyist the other day, just to get a little bit of a budget analysis to see how the recent state budget that passed, how that's going to affect the funding of local governments. And as I understand it, like one piece of the state budget that was actually helpful is the funding to local municipalities. We're going to get more funding. But there's also a flip side where the federal, whatever big trash bill passed, we're going to have a funding gap from that. So we're trying to find out like how that's going to actually, like, and I'll use your word, Ben, pencil out. I like that word. I'm going to start using it. How that's all going to pencil out as well. Just a couple other quick things. We do have the CDA here, the Madison CDA, and Davey might know a little bit more about that. I know Aaron's colleague, my colleague on the board, Heidi, probably knows a lot more about that, but there are some social housing projects that I think they are classified as social housing projects. The Madison Area Community Land Trust does list them as such, as social housing projects. So one that's happening in District 6, my District 6, but not Davey's District 6, is at Voigt Farm. There's a parcel, I think, on the northern end of that, where the Madison Area Community Land Trust is looking to do a social housing project. And that's I think that's in 2026. And then the other one, I think that's going to be the big one, is the South Transfer Point. And I think that's going to be publicly owned by the CDA, but there is some partnership mechanism that I'd want to understand a little bit better. But I think through the land banking on the south side is where they've been doing some of that. So it might be worth us, as Maria was suggesting, to do a study to see if that can be more broadly implemented, or as part of some of the existing studies that were done to see if they did do an evaluation on the social housing model as well.
I do want to, since it just came to my mind, I do also think I really want to suggest, if you were to pursue a referendum, or really whatever, but especially a referendum, I would highly recommend, and this is going to sound obvious, but like, I'm just going to say this, hire a lawyer, and definitely try to find a good one, because obviously a lot of times referendums will get thrown off a ballot if there's something wrong with the referendum text or whatnot, or if it out of bounds of what you can actually do with a referendum. So like in Washington state, we have this thing called the single subject clause, which says that initiatives can only do one thing at a time. That's why we had two initiatives. You can't make a developer and then also fund it at the same time. That'd be two things. So like it's these little, legalese nonsense. I understand there's reasons for it, but like you don't want to put something, gather signatures, and then find out, oh God, it's all thrown out over something like that, right? And these things come with typically decades and decades of laws and regulations and constitutional stuff with it that can make it very complicated. That's expensive, but like we paid, Christ, the first time it was like $6,000 in lawyer fees, and this last one cost almost like 20K just to write the initiative. So something to consider. Takesha, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi. So I'm just give a little background. I am here representing a person that lived experience of homelessness, and then I also have over 15 years of direct service. I also work case management doing permanent supportive housing. So I have both a lived experience and then also a professional background. So my lens is like both worlds. So right now, I'm leaning towards my lived experience and also being part of our local homeless services consortium. What's the best way for, first of all, maybe for you to come out, hopefully to speak to one of our committee groups, and I'm thinking our education and advocacy, but in order for us to kind of support or either get the word out or try to get folks to back this up, if we feel like it's something that we see that may fit in within our community, what's the, like, could you give me some pointers of like, what's the best way? Should I just start there? Hopefully getting you to come out to talk to one of our committees about this, and then like hopefully us being able to push our local leaders and legislators to kind of like hopefully adopt such a practice after we figure something out.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, thank you for the invitation. I would love to. Any of us from HON would love to come out and talk about this, of course. So I think what I would, there's probably two things that I would say here for the homelessness angle. Benefit whoever you're talking to about this, whether it's within your coalition, whether you're talking to voters, elected officials, wherever stage you're in this. The main benefit I think to consider when it comes to social housing and homelessness is that because it's publicly owned and because it is permanently affordable, and in Seattle's case, that means tenants aren't paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. What that means is that once someone gets in, they're not going to lose their housing because of a change of income. And that's good for two things. One, for when it goes down, because sometimes it does because of market conditions, right? Or, you lose your job, there's a recession, whatever, right? And ideally you have a good funding mechanism for your social housing developer so that it has lots of tax revenue coming into it. And because you've got a bunch of other earners in there, like in a low income affordable housing development, when the economy goes bad, a majority of your tenants lose their jobs, or maybe not a majority, but a lot of them do. Whereas if you have a diverse set of incomes within a building, it's not quite as bad. You're not typically as exposed to that. And so it's more financially sustainable. And so the developer can spread around more money, more resources towards ensuring that low income tenants or no income tenants, because of recession or whatever, or people who are prone to homelessness, don't lose their housing, right? And the other side of this is that once someone who is currently homeless or someone who is low income or whatever, once they get into social housing, because you're not having an income cap, right, to get your social housing, as you grow in income, which we want people to do, you don't lose your housing. That's good. So it doesn't create a trap for those for people who are struggling with homelessness or struggling with low income, right? It provides them with the security to be able to increase in income and not lose their benefits. And it's also a more diverse and economically diverse community. So you get those benefits too, which, as we all know, it is connections and it is access to a more diverse income community that also allows people to grow in incomes as well, and get to those opportunities. As opposed to, and as for actually making it happen, I I would have those conversations with housing advocates, with environmental advocates, with unions, with tenants unions, anyone and everyone who is down for this model. Talk to them about social housing, talk to them about like the broad benefits, the boldness of it, and how it can serve everybody, low income, high income, homelessness, housed, all of that. And then figure out from there what makes the most sense for your community, like specifically how to actually make it happen. Again, I encourage referendums because it's worked for us. I personally think going straight to the voters in general is better. But that's what I would say. Get those people into a room, figure out who's willing to dedicate the next 18 months, possibly 2 years towards this project, who can raise the money to hire the lawyers, etc. Get the initiative written, and then have the connections with field heavy organizations, people like Democratic Socialists, Democrats, Democratic chapters, anyone and everyone who does lots of door knocking, all that good jazz, to get out the vote for it if we're going with a referendum, to make that happen.
Okay, I like what you said. One thing I didn't hear, so with social housing, are we, or maybe I have missed this, do you all do any supportive services in conjunction with social housing? I mean, because as people
It's
start elevating, I could see like how, having that supportive, saying to say, hey, we could work on X, Y, and Z now, because
mhm,
you're out here and you're still retaining majority of your income from what it sounds like this program is doing. How can we help
right.
you get to the next level, et cetera? So I'm just curious.
Yeah, the short answer to that is that we legally could not include supportive services or wraparound services in the creation of the social housing developer, because that would have violated the single subject clause that we have in our Washington State Constitution. But the social housing developer is empowered to do that sort of thing. And a majority of the social housing developer board, 13 members of 13-member board, 7 of them are tenants who live in social housing. So there's already kind of like baked in interest, shall we say, to have the social housing developer work with those organizations, provide those services, et cetera, et cetera. So the social housing developer, it could do it itself. It can work with nonprofits already doing it, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was just a legal issue why we don't explicitly have that specifically.
Okay, well, good. Thank you so much for that. I do, I want to take this back to a couple of spaces that I'm in and to see like, how we can start maybe learning more and having conversations about such a model. So I would definitely love for if we could. I don't think I got your email. If you can, I don't know if you left it somewhere.
Yeah. Let me put that in here. I can also connect, for anybody, by the way, some organizations that do outreach and provide services and help to homeless people in Seattle who were very active with our campaign, because they also saw this as like critical to addressing the homelessness crisis in Seattle. Like we had several people who were going through homelessness that volunteered some of their time when they could to making this happen, because it's like, you get in, you don't have to lose your housing because of a change of income. Like that's huge. That's life-saving. It's more than just life changing, it's life-saving.
I know.
So
And
yes, I'd love
I
to.
think New York had a similar thing like that years ago. I think it was New York somewhere where they was trying to uplift that, but it wasn't called it wasn't called social housing. Remember I was in a space at a conference somewhere and they was talking about a similar model. So anyway, I appreciate this conversation and I'm definitely taking your email down and I am locking it in, copy and pasting, and hopefully you hear from me soon, if not me, one of our colleagues or someone, but I really like this idea and I love it. And thank you to Maria too for because I really like this idea.
Thank you. Love to hear from you. Appreciate the questions too. Al, I see a hand. Oh, does that
Oh.
stand for Alderman? Sorry.
No, it's for Alder. Yeah, I could spell it out. It's only 2 more letters. Ben, thanks for your presentation. It's very interesting. Would you have any documentation, like example budgets of how some of these social housing projects work in practice?
I do. It might take me a minute to find specifically.
Not
I have
right
like,
now, like in the
okay,
following
so
days. Yeah.
yeah, we can send along like capital stacks, and specific examples of Montgomery County, Maryland, actually, is the one of like other place in the United States that builds social housing that's very close to what we do. So that's like a US context that I can send along, but I'm also happy to send like, I mean, we took our inspiration from Vienna and Singapore, and I personally think and agree that like they do it the best. I mean, again, like over 80% of the population in Singapore lives there in social housing. Half the Vienna population lives in social housing. So also happy to send along some the capital stacks and in the financing model of how they make that work, so you can kind of like do a comparative analysis.
Sure. That'd be great. Thank you.
So check in the chat. Oh, Lindbergh.
And thank you. Good to see you.
You as well. Thank you.
Yeah. So I met Maria at this conference a couple weekends ago where she was speaking about social housing, and going about it through city council route or the local route, local solutions, and so glad that I met Maria, because that was kind of one way to go about it. And then I'd already been thinking about, I went to that discussion because I had already been thinking about social housing because I found House Our Neighbors through an interview that one of our other members did with someone from like the National Homeless Law Center, who mentioned House Our Neighbors, and they're doing amazing work. You need to go check them out. So I went and checked them out, and I went to your website and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I found like a creative, I found cities coming up with creative ways to address their housing and homelessness issues. One through the people, which Seattle's doing, and then another through local government, which what Maria's doing, or Maria and her team are doing. And so I I chased Maria down after her panel and was like, hey, we're working on this thing. Would you mind coming and speaking? And then Maria was down right away. And then I emailed your team member, Tiffany, at House Our Neighbors, and like didn't expect her to respond because it was like info at House Our Neighbors. So I didn't expect anyone to respond. And she responded right away. She's like, hey, I'm on vacation, but like, yes, we'll do it. And so that's why I wanted you all to come speak. Yogesh and Davey have been trying to work with us to hopefully figure out a way to address our focus is homelessness, but I think housing as well. It's they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad Takesha thought this was valuable. And I already reached out to I already asked Tiffany if your group would be willing to come or just speak to more people in Madison and Dane County about this. And so Takesha already was like, hey. So Takesha, I will connect you with their team, and we can try to set up maybe some like town hall maybe, or some kind of mini conference or something like that where we can get the whole community involved in this discussion and make them aware of what social housing is, because Aaron sent me a video like not that long ago talking about social housing, and I was calling it public housing, and then like social housing came up, and then I had to like look into that and figure out what it was. Your website is amazing at breaking it down, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Takesha, I understand when you were saying like, what is social housing? I'm not familiar. I didn't know like a month ago what it was. But yeah, I really, really appreciate you coming and speaking on this and talking about the creative ways you're finding revenue to push this forward. I wanted Davey and Yogesh to kind of hear about all these things, and maybe it could, I mean, we have our context and policies and laws that we have to try to work within, but maybe we can figure out a way to apply what you're doing, what Maria's doing, with our context to figure out a solution, because I think we all know that housing is out of control, and then homelessness rates are spiking all across the country.
It is.
So
Thank you. I just want to very quickly leave a closing thought, if I may, because I know y'all's foremost approach is coming from homelessness, and that is kind of how ours started off as well, and still was. It still was like a forefront of it. And then it kind of became homelessness plus housing supply together at the same time because we realized it was like, oh, this problem is like wide ranging. That I want to emphasize that it is something that addresses a root cause of homelessness, right? There's lots of different ways we can approach addressing homelessness, right? There's like the short-term things like shelter beds, wraparound services, all of that. That can get people housed rapidly and whatnot. And I really want to like send home that what this does is this is definitely a long-term thing. I wouldn't have the expectation that this is going to like quickly or in the short term um, be the end all that like solves your homelessness problem. This is one of those things that's like a yes and type policy, right? It's a thing that you have to work at. Once you build it, you have to fund it, you have to continuously fund it, and it's something that will take years to build out and get to a point where like you're no longer dealing broadly with a homelessness crisis. It's a preventative measure because of course, as we know, that like we have both a flow and a stock, shall we say, issue with homelessness. In Seattle, we just passed a over $1 billion bonding measure to provide homelessness services, right? It's like shelter, it's housing, it's wraparound services, all of that, right? And it's done wonderfully. Wonderfully. It has gotten more people off the street than it was expected to when it was first passed. But we still have more people ending up on the street because people are ending up on the street faster than we can get them housed. And it's not the same people usually, right? It's just it's the housing prices is skyrocketing, the unaffordability is skyrocketing faster than we could even possibly hope to keep people back in. And even if we were dumping billions more, you still have the problem that people are ending up on the street in the first place. So like social housing specifically addresses that first thing. It addresses flow. It's not first and foremost addressing stock. It is indirectly, but it is directly addressing flow. So I just wanted to like mention that because that is something that we talked about a lot in our campaign. And at the same time, that's also why we spent a lot of time talking about like the housing supply aspect of it and it appealing and serving a broad range of incomes as a preventative measure. No matter your income, you're not going to be kicked out on the street just because your income goes down or because of a recession or your boss is bad at accounting, right? Like it's a preventative addressing the root cause measure. And so I don't say that to like maybe throw cold water or anything or to temper expectations, but just to help you align your messaging about social housing with your goals of addressing homelessness, so that way you do reach the most amount of people and you do get that broad appeal to make this happen so you can address the root cause of homelessness in your communities, and to help people understand how it benefits those who are struggling with homelessness, and to prevent people from ever having to deal with that trauma and that awful experience in the first place. Ultimately, I think that's kind of what it's about. But we would love to come out and talk, town hall, video call, whatever. We're always happy to talk about social housing and how it could just make things better for everybody. And so thank you for having me come and talk. And it's great to also hear from Maria and the work that Portland is doing, our neighbors down south, to make it happen there too.
All right, I've got a question for Yogesh and Davey, and then I've got a dip. So, obviously we want to get the ball rolling on this, right? There's no time like the present to start addressing this crisis. So, with that said, we're kind of hoping that we can give you guys some like actionable items coming out of this meeting. So a couple options could be like, do you think like the ship has already sailed on getting a budget item in for this upcoming budget about social housing? Is it too late for something like that? And if so, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have the concepts of social housing already in Madison and Dane County. I think if you look at what the land banking that we're doing on the south side is specifically working with the Madison Area Community Land Trust. Olivia Williams has been a big social housing advocate here locally, and that's kind of her passion. So I would suggest when the town hall happens to bring in somebody like Olivia. And also, if we look at like the city's RFP for affordable housing, and then if we look at the county's RFP for affordable housing, for some of the criteria that we have in there, some of the criteria that we had in there specifically is around partnering to end homelessness. For example, that's 15% of the capacity there. Tenant selection is 20% of the evaluation criteria. Supportive services plans, 10% of the criteria. So I think a lot of the terminology and I think the pillars of social housing exist. And I mean, so we put the Affordable Housing Trust Fund from 4 million when I first started on the county board to 28 million. So the money is there. If you look at what Seattle had, I think they had 53 million that they generated, and that was for 400 units. I don't know if there was a direct thing, but I saw them in the same bullet point. But here, I think if you look at some of the projects that have been developed, and if you look at some of the different RFPs, there's some of the affordable housing units have a 40-year 40-year requirement on them. And then the other one, I put it in the chat here. I think it's called the Allura, and that's for a permanent requirement. So one of the things we're doing with the county right now, and this was as a result of our last meeting, is updating the county's RFP. And there's 4 specific points that we're looking to hit on there to address affordability. I'm just going to put these in the chat. These were I made some slides. These are part of the slides that we were going to have, but these are 4 of the pieces of the RFP that we're looking to have. And so I think what we want to look at is, okay, we have this pot of $28 million of county money. The city has a pot of money as well. There are these nonprofits already out there, like the Madison Area Community Land Trust. There's these existing projects that are going to happen. Like there's the Voight Farm project that's going to have a social housing component. There is the South Transfer Point project that's going to be essentially CDA public housing. So how can we take all of these, and maybe instead of doing a study, how can we use these actual real world projects to get some lessons learned from that? And I think the way the county and the city are going to kind of work on this is the county is going to have a lot of money we borrow on our capital budget. That money is primarily going to go, a lot of it goes to the city of Madison. It's going to go to other jurisdictions here as well. And how do we make the best efficient use of that money that we already have to say, like, we want this money to go to certain projects that have certain affordability requirements, that have a public aspect of ownership in them, that is not a market-based plan, that's more it's a public plan, but it uses that mixed sort of component in there where it's not just low-income housing, it's low-income housing, but it's also market rate housing, so the two can subsidize each other. So I'm thinking we have a lot of these concepts here, and if there's a way we can tie them together, and I think an expert like Olivia Williams can help us with that. I'm going to talk to Heidi as well. She couldn't make it today. She's on vacation, but I'm going to talk to her as well to see how we can use not only the RFP process, but the project selection process, and how we can look at some of these social housing projects that are out there now, or CDA projects, and maybe we can bring more concepts of more of these pillars in there.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is great, obviously. I think like eventually, of course, we all want to get to a point where we have the infrastructure to house every single homeless person in Dane County and prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, right? So with that said, you kind of outlined a plan about using the existing funds and the existing projects, allocating the funds to those projects, and maybe additional projects in the future, and using those projects as like real world proof of concept for the effectiveness of social housing. But I guess like the next step to that would be then using that proof of concept to begin to imagine and create like real proposals around how to build that infrastructure that I was talking about to actually house every homeless person in Dane County and prevent people from becoming homeless. So maybe this is like it's too early to, start talking about what that could look like, but I am curious about like how do you think that would proceed? Like if everything could go your way on getting the funding to these projects in isolation and having a like using these projects, if the projects go well, or even if they don't, like the lessons learned from them, how do you imagine like then using these pieces to build up the infrastructure to actually create like a robust solution to homelessness in Dane County?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to look at is we had some projects where we developed permanent supportive housing that had wraparound services that didn't go as we planned them to. So I think we need to look at that model. I'd be interested, I know Seattle was saying that they couldn't do that because the budget had, or the referendum had to have one specific item in there. So I think we have to look at the lessons learned from that. I think the other big piece of this is going to be, so we have a $31 million structural deficit in Dane County. Our guidance that we were given was no additional positions requested, extreme restraint when it comes to capital budget. I'll just put all this in the chat. Trying to merge programs together and trying to seek partnerships. So this was our official guidance. So the first step to that is that $28 million that's in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I don't think that number is going to be that high. So the first thing I think we need to do that's critical is to try to fund that as much as we can. So we have to look at what carryover we have from capital budget items last year to see how we can apply those towards this year. The other thing that I think is going to be a pretty urgent priority is I know Maria mentioned a little bit about ARPA funds. Like we had ARPA funds supporting Dairy Drive. So Dairy Drive is out of money and Dairy Drive has to stay open. That's an absolute priority that has to happen. So we have to figure out a way to make that happen. Otherwise, all the investments in Dairy Drive are going to go away. And then all the people who are at Dairy Drive right now, if they all lose their housing, even though it is tiny housing, it's more modest housing, we're going to have to figure out a place to put them. So I think working together to keep Dairy Drive open is definitely going to be a priority. So I kind of gave you a roundabout answer. The first thing we need to do is see how we can maintain our current level of service, but part of that answer is how can we look at the resources that we have right now and make sure, since they're public resources, they're going towards public good. And I think in our budget, in our RFP process, and in our partnership with the city and county, that's going to have to be where our focus is. It might not be getting new money will be the easy thing to do. I think looking at the money we have and saying, okay, well, this has to go to here. And, I chair the environmental committee. We just did our operating budget. We're trying to figure out what to cut. It's a very hard process. But, part of this might have to be, we might have to look at, okay, well, how does our capital budget in other departments? Like, for example, the jail is $225 million of capital borrowing. That's money that we can't borrow for other purposes because our interest as a percentage of our operating budget is just really cutting on our ability to do this. So we're grappling with a lot of the poor decisions that were made in the past that we fought really hard against, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with them in the future. So trying to work with our current resources and figuring out how to do that and making sure those resources go towards where the most need is, I think is going to be the biggest priority.
If I can chime in too, I would, echo most of all of what Yogesh just said, but from the city perspective, we also have a structural deficit of $22 million. Fortunately, we had a referendum passed to stop at that hole. But that just means we still have to be very careful going forward. So my priorities are to maintain at least the amount that we're spending on homeless services. And I know Takesha here is co-chair of the committee I'm on, the City County Homeless Issues Committee, and we just put forth a letter that was recommending all that. plus requesting some additional for some lived experience funding and resources. And you got to ask for it, otherwise you won't get it. But you know, I also have a big interest in all sorts of housing and getting housing built. So we have a number of things going on right now with um, affordable housing, things that are income restricted. Um, we do have to watch something. I'll kind of be a hawk on looking forward is that they have a long enough runway. So there was one project that just had its um, income restricted sunsetted because it was only set for 15 years over by McPark Park. So I don't know the history behind that, but that seems awfully short-sighted. That was only set for 15 years. So as someone said earlier here, it needs to be at least 30 to 50 to be reliable. Um, but what else? I had something else to add to that. But at least, you know, maintaining these services that we have, that's the biggest threat. I also plan on being somewhat of a hawk on our capital budget because some people look at that as free money, but it's just kicking a lot of costs down the road, and that takes away from other things in the operating budget for these important services. Um, so, you know, I want to be realistic about these things, but I also do want to look at new solutions and things that no one has thought of before, maybe, or no one locally has thought of. So I really do appreciate this meeting today to hear about what some other cities are doing and what might be applicable to us and what we might be able to learn from. So thank you.
So one other thing, if I could just touch on it, I know we're running long on time. We talked about the ADRC at our last meeting. So I've been working on that, and this is the process that we proposed. I've been meeting with the Beacon. I met with Nisi Hawkins there. We would like the Beacon to do the pre-screening of patrons. That's something they're doing now. But following that, we want to have standing times where the ADRC staff is at the Beacon to do the functional screenings as well. So when they do those functional screenings, there'll be 2 days a month where they would come in, and those would be standing meetings. And then if they didn't have anybody who required a screening, they could just cancel it. So I'm working to try to get this done. I am getting a lot of pushback, but I've had multiple meetings on this with the Beacon, with Health and Human Services staff, but this is a process that I think is doable. I think it's efficient. I think the resources get placed where they need to be placed. And I think if we can line up everybody who needs ADRC services, have them there, have ADRC come twice a month, and then sort of take care of everybody back to back, do the functional screenings, do the paperwork that's needed. I think that's the good approach. So I am working on this, and this is something I think is important to do. So I'll keep everyone updated on how this goes, but this is what we've been working on there. I also have asked the Beacon to provide us a calendar of all their services that they have, a monthly kind of calendar of what they're doing out there. So here are, I don't know if this is going to copy and paste into here, but here are the service providers along with their calendar. And I have this for the whole month of May and June, but I'd like them to continue to do this just so we know what services are in there, it'll help us identify gaps. And we're trying to do everything we can to bring the services to the Beacon. So we wanted to just start out by doing an inventory of what services are there.
I was trying to speak to two of those things. I really want to just highlight that Seattle found a creative way to create a revenue source. Can we do that? Can we look at different things that we've not looked at? Or, you know, there are companies making lots and lots and lots of money. Can we find out ways to get them involved? That's I think that's really, really, really important. One, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I talked to Spectrum about this. They just did a really cool project at Operation Fresh Start, which was $50,000 tech room for a Fresh Start. And so for folks who don't know what Fresh Start is, it takes a lot of at-risk youth, brings them into the program that teaches them a lot of real world skills in terms of building housing, construction, and all that. And they also work with the county. We've had a 15-year partnership with them on doing trail restoration and training people to be conservationists. So we've had people from that program come actually work for the county. So what they did is they donated 50,000 towards basically building a tech room so people could go in and work on their resumes. They could work on their any job skills they needed if they wanted to work on design programs for like, I don't know what those programs are. Back in the days, it was like AutoCAD or whatever. But so I can talk to them and ask them about their community program and see if they have, the capacity to do some investment there as well.
Okay. Yeah, Epic, all the insurance companies, Google, all of those, and I'm sure there's many others that I'm not thinking. Exact Sciences, yeah, there are a lot that we can try to work with, or just we can take it to a vote and see if people would like to, find a way to tax them, so we can fund things that we need in our community. But I really hope that that both of you could maybe try to work with us to come up with a solution that way. And then I just want to point out, thank you for working on getting the ADRC to the Beacon. The fact that they can go twice a month shows
Well,
that
this is a proposal. I want to be clear.
proposal.
This is what I proposed. Yeah, we're still meeting on it, but yes.
Okay. If it gets done, that shows us that it can happen, and it really can happen. I don't know what they're going to push back on, but it can happen.
I told him, I said, well, if you don't agree to this plan, the Beacon will just call you and you can just show up whenever they need someone there. So I think
the Beacon is understaffed. They don't have enough staff to even make that call.
Yeah.
That's why they need to be there as much as possible.
Yeah.
Cool.
I want to say, I think ADRC's pushback may be the population that they serve, because they usually serve, mainly folks that's like, older, aging, of course, and the age of disability. So I think that would be a huge pushback from them, because they wouldn't be able to serve a lot of folks, probably according to their, procedures and standards, or, policies in Beacon, to be honest, because a lot of people that's there may not even be on disability. You know what I'm saying? And that's another thing, you have to be on disability. So it's all these different things that I can see them pushing back on. But I'm not gonna lie, working in housing, I have seen them, as me and my colleagues reached out to, they would come out if we had some people that meet their criteria. So I would say that if it's somebody at the Beacon that say, hey, they disabled, they this age range, according to their screening, they would come and meet that person where they're at. So they would come to them. So that is a plus. So maybe getting it set up that way may be something to think about. But them going there to be there just like, I don't know. I don't know how that would look on a regular monthly or weekly or bi-weekly schedule. Because they'd be like, okay, it could be some pushback. Those are just my pros and cons of what I can see.
Yeah, and that's why we tried to do the pre-screening. So we said, well, the Beacon will do the pre-screening and they'll line people up. So that's the way we tried to get around that.
And I worked there, and I would say the largest population are aging people, and those people are disabled for a number of reasons. A lot of the medical. Who would qualify for assisted living or even a nursing facility as like transitional housing, you could call it, like non-traditional transitional housing, so they can get their health back and then move on to independent living. That's the biggest population at the Beacon. So I really think that them being there as much as possible is really important. And I also just want to say, Maria, thank you for coming. Asking like Takesha asked, would you be willing to speak to other groups when I know you're probably extremely busy? But if we can give you enough notice, and maybe even if we can get this town hall or mini conference together, would you be willing to come out and speak?
Of course, and I'm happy to also assign one of my staffers or my counselor to take this on. Everybody in my team is excited to share some of our lessons that we're learning in real time. And we just appreciate folks being interested in some of our baby steps in Portland right now.
I wanted to add just one more thing, if I could, as a closing thought for me. I appreciated what Ben said about calling social housing a social good, framing it that way. I've been trying to frame homelessness services not as a burden or cost center, but as investment in people and in the city, looking at how, there's the empathy approach and the right for people to have dignity and wanting to care for folks, but also the economic fact of that if we get people into stable housing, those who can work have those things satisfied and it benefits everyone. So it's not some distant problem we just want to push off. It's wanting to actively help people, reintegrate into society who want to that way. And besides the empathy part. So it is a social good. It is a investment in the city and in people. It's money well spent.
Absolutely. And hey, I got a jet too. I'm late to something, but I'm always late, so it doesn't. No one expects me to be on time. So I'm in a jet, but Maria, I definitely would like to reach out to you, and Ben, I'd like to reach out to you as well just to get some more info. We don't really have staff here. We're all part-time. We're like low-level elected officials. We have like all this other stuff. So we're hoping to lean on some of your expertise if possible.
Thank you. Love to.
All right.
Yep. Thank you very
I'll
much.
do it. All right. Bye.
See
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Appreciated it.
I'm gonna keep the room open if anyone wants to chat more. I'm sure people have other things to do, but I'm hanging out for a little bit if anyone wants to talk more.
I have to go, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I really did. This is
Isha,
really-
I need to connect with you. I want to have like a full on meeting with you because I've watched you in in several of your meetings, and I can tell like your voicing like I remember one meeting you were like the city county homeless committee. You're like, what can we actually do to make something actually happen? And I was like,
right?
I want to talk to that person.
We definitely can connect. Just shoot me an email or something. We can set something up. I really, yeah. Because I feel like I've been doing this work and sitting in these spaces for so long, and it's like, how can we get some things in action? Like what, So yeah, that is one of the things with me. So I appreciate you for noticing that too.
Oh, every time I see it.
Yeah.
So I will. In fact, that's why I've been inviting you to a lot of things. You don't have to come to everything that I invite you to, but I just want to make sure that you're at least like invited. So if you want to come, the invitation.
Sounds good. Yeah. But this was very nice, and I really appreciate this conversation tonight. I am so happy to hear, especially about the social housing. I definitely got some research to do, some more. But thank you all. You all have a great evening.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Aaron, thank you for hosting. I was sick for all week, and I woke up thinking oh, thank God, I don't have to host this.
All good. It said you're recording when you log into the Zoom, so I was like, that's fine. People should know.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
No, that I don't think anyone had any issues. No one wrote anything, and if they do, we can try to figure out a way to hide their name, blur it out.
Yeah.
Ways to do that. Maria, so cool to actually make this happen from that panel. I wasn't sure if it would happen, but I always at least try. And so thank you so much, Ben. Like maybe Ben came in last minute because Tiffany couldn't. Is that how it worked out?
That's right. Yeah, she had to pick up she has, I think, after school thing with her kid. Didn't pan out. So was more than happy to step in. I've been talking about social housing to voters for the better part of 18 months, almost every day. So like always happy to.
So good. Like